In the next 10 seconds, you're going to make a decision. Not a big one, nothing dramatic. Just pick a number in your head from 1 to 10. Don't say it out loud. Just choose one. Now here's the uncomfortable question. When did you actually decide? Because there's a growing body of evidence suggesting something that sounds impossible at first. Your brain may start making the choice before you consciously experience yourself choosing it. And if that's true, then free will, the feeling that there's a captain inside your head steering the ship, might be more like a story your brain tells you after the ship has already turned. But that isn't the whole story. And by the end of this video, you'll see why the free will debate isn't really about philosophy. It's about what kind of creature you think you are. Let's start with the most common definition of free will. Most people don't mean I am free from physics. They mean something simpler. I could have done otherwise. I could have picked 7 instead of 3. I could have stayed quiet instead of snapping. I could have gotten up instead of hitting snooze. That feeling is so basic that it seems beyond questioning. You experience a thought. You weigh options. You choose. You act, cause and effect, input and output, a self in the middle. But neuroscience has a habit of walking into the most sacred parts of human experience and turning on the lights. In the early 1980s, a researcher named Benjamin Libet ran a now famous experiment. It was simple on purpose. Participants sat in front of a clock-like device, a dot moving around a circle. Their task was to flex their wrist whenever they felt like it. No planning, no reason, just whenever. And they had to report the moment they became aware of the urge to move, the instant the decision appeared in consciousness. While they did this, Libet recorded their brain activity with EEG, watching for a signal called the readiness potential, a slow buildup of neural activity that happens before a voluntary movement. Here's what he found. The readiness potential started ramping up hundreds of milliseconds before participants reported the conscious intention to move. In other words, the brain was gearing up to act before the person felt like they had decided. Not minutes before, not hours, but still, before. And once you see that pattern, it's hard to unsee it, because it suggests a disturbing possibility. Maybe consciousness is not the origin of the decision. Maybe it's the announcement. Now, if you're listening closely, you might be thinking, okay, but that's just a wrist flex. That's meaningless. And you're right to be skeptical. A random finger twitch is not the same thing as choosing a career or ending a relationship. But the real reason the Libet experiment mattered wasn't the wrist. It was the timeline. It was the first crack in a very old assumption that your conscious mind is the place where voluntary action begins. Over the next decades, researchers tried to push that crack wider. In 2008, a team led by John Dylan Haynes published a study using fMRI. Participants chose between pressing a left or right button whenever they wanted. The shocking headline version of this study traveled everywhere. Scientists can predict your decision 7 seconds before you're aware of it. But here's the more careful truth. The predictions weren't perfect. They were modestly better than chance, around the 60% range in some conditions. Still, that's not nothing, because it implies that patterns in your brain can bias a choice before the choice becomes a conscious experience. And it gets stranger, because it's not just that your brain prepares movements early, it's that your brain also seems to invent reasons late. There's a phenomenon psychologists call confabulation. It's when the brain fills in an explanation that feels true, even when it isn't. In split-brain patients, people whose connection between hemispheres was surgically cut to treat epilepsy, researchers found something eerie. If information was shown only to the right hemisphere, the person could respond to it with their left hand, but their speaking left hemisphere didn't know why. So what did the speaking mind do? It guessed. It told a story, not a lie, a narrative, a sincere explanation produced after the fact, because the brain hates a vacuum where meaning should be. This is sometimes called the interpreter, the part of the mind that turns behavior into a coherent, personal story. And once you realize that such an interpreter exists, you start noticing it everywhere. In the early 2000s, researchers demonstrated choice blindness. Participants were shown 2 photos of faces and asked which one they found more attractive. Then, through a sleight of hand trick, the experimenters sometimes handed them the other photo, the one they didn't pick. And a surprising number of people didn't notice the switch. Instead, they calmly explained why they had chosen it. They talked about the eyes, the smile, the vibe. Their brains generated convincing reasons for a choice they never actually made, which raises a terrifying possibility. How often do you do this in real life? How often do you feel a decision is yours when what you really mean is your brain produced an outcome and your consciousness wrote the press release? At this point, some people take the most extreme conclusion. Free will is an illusion, full stop. But here's where the story turns, because the best scientists working on this topic will tell you the data does not prove that you're a puppet. It proves something more precise and more interesting. It proves that the moment of decision is not a single moment. The way it feels in your head is a clear inner click, a mental gavel. I decide now. But in the brain, decision-making looks less like a gavel and more like weather. Signals build, compete, fade, return, tip the system, sometimes reverse. What you experience as a clean choice may be the end of a process that has been unfolding beneath awareness for seconds, minutes, or years. And even Libet, the researcher whose work helped start this whole war, didn't say free will is dead. He argued for something subtler, a possible veto. The idea is that even if the brain initiates an action unconsciously, consciousness might still have a window to stop it. Not free will as a magical creator of decisions, but free won't as a break. And whether or not Libet's veto holds up in every detail, it points to something we all recognize from real life. You don't always choose what appears in your mind, but sometimes you can choose whether to endorse it. You can notice the impulse to send the message and not send it. You can feel anger rise and wait. That capacity, the ability to pause, simulate consequences, and redirect behavior may be the most meaningful version of human freedom we have. So why does it feel like there's a single you authoring everything? Because the feeling of agency is useful. Psychologist Daniel Wegner argued that the experience of conscious will is a kind of perception, like color. It's not a direct readout of reality. It's the brain's best guess about what caused what. When a thought appears right before an action, and the action matches the thought, the brain tags it as, I did that. Most of the time, that tag is accurate enough to run a life. It helps you learn, helps you plan, helps you take responsibility. But under certain conditions, priming, deception, brain damage, social pressure, the tag can be wrong. And that's the key. The free will illusion isn't necessarily that you have no control. It's that your sense of control is not a perfect instrument. It's a model, a user interface. Now zoom out. If decisions emerge from layers of processing you don't fully access, then the old courtroom question, could you have done otherwise, starts to blur. Because the truth is, in the exact same state, with the exact same brain, with the exact same history, you probably would do the same thing again. But that doesn't mean change is impossible. It means change happens differently than your intuition suggests. You don't will yourself into being a new person in a single heroic moment. You redesign the conditions that generate your choices: sleep, environment, friends, friction, habits, defaults. You stop treating your behavior like it comes from a ghost in the machine and start treating it like it comes from a living system that can be trained. So here's the final twist. If free will is partly an illusion, the scary takeaway is, nothing is my fault. But the smarter takeaway is the opposite. Your life is shaped by forces you don't see, which means you can learn to see them. Because the moment you understand that your conscious self is not the sole author, you stop relying on motivation and start building architecture. You stop asking, why am I like this? And start asking, what system keeps producing this outcome? And that question is powerful enough to change a life. You are not a puppet, but you are also not a king on a throne. You are something stranger, a society of processes negotiating in the dark and presenting you with a single coherent story called me. And if that story feels like free will, it's because the story has a job. It's trying to make a complicated animal capable of learning, morality, and meaning. The illusion isn't that you choose nothing. The illusion is that choosing is simple. Most of you happens before you arrive. And the real freedom, the only freedom that's ever been available to a human being, is learning how to work with the part of yourself that you can't fully see. Because the decisions you feel like you make in a moment are usually the result of a mind that has been becoming you for a very long time.